right, thank you. Welcome to tonight's Planning Commission meeting for the City of Anderson. We will start with an invocation by Maurice McKenzie.
Let us pray. Heavenly Father, thank you for this day and thank you for all the blessings that you provide for us every day of our lives. And Lord, bless this board tonight. Help guide and direct their decisions so that they may be in the best interest of our community. In your name we pray. Amen.
Amen. All right, heading into the approval of minutes from the March 1st meeting. Did everybody get their packet? And if so, have a chance to look through any changes? Or hearing none, can somebody make a motion they be approved? Dave makes the motion. Second? Herbert makes a second. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right. Any addenda to the agenda?
No addenda tonight.
All right, we'll move into the public hearings of ANX 2201.
Yes, thank you. This is a request to annex and zone 4.96 acres that's located on Salem Church Road to RM18 multifamily residential. You can see this area depicted on the map before you. It's the dark green area, the hatched area, or properties that are located inside the city limits. And you may be familiar with many of those properties because it wasn't that long ago. In 2020, we annexed several pieces of developed property in this area. And much of the land is zoned RM18 multifamily residential. And we annexed this property in the area. There were 3 apartment complexes. There was a single family residential development and also a couple of commercial properties as well. But the applicant is requesting to annex the property to RM18 multifamily residential in order to construct an apartment complex. And again, in your package, you see this conceptual drawing. And that just gives you a general idea of what they're proposing. Obviously, this has not gone before any type of site plan review or anything of that nature, so this is obviously subject to change. It does not take into consideration our new tree ordinance and other guidelines. So again, that's just something to show you from a conceptual standpoint, because it is kind of an unusual piece of property in terms of how it's shaped. Again, the applicant's wishing to annex in order to receive city services. We've received no comments about this. The property has been posted, it's been advertised. We've had no comments about this. So from a staff perspective, we do recommend approval of this. It is a recommendation the request is RM18 multifamily residential. And again, as I mentioned a moment ago, much of the area that we recently annexed in this area is also zoned RM18 multifamily residential. So it is a consistent land use with the area in general. Any questions?
Yes, so all we're doing right now is annexing and zoning. We're not doing anything about what they can and cannot do for the property, just
right.
As far as
this annex to RM18 multifamily residential, it allows multifamily residential units up to 18 per acre. So that standard would be what they would submit with their site plans and development plans that would go before the staff, engineering department, everyone else, to make sure it complies with our guidelines.
All right. Any other questions for staff? Hearing none, would someone like to make a motion on ANX 2201?
I would. That be approved.
All right, Mr. Seegers with the approval. Anyone with a second? Carr with a second. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, it goes forward to City Council for
April the 11th.
April 11th.
Next week. Yes.
All right. Next is MISC 2201.
Yes, this is a request. This is coming from the City of Anderson. From time to time, it's necessary to refine the language in the zoning ordinance to make amendments to that because of several changes in community conditions, different laws, preferences, along with several other items. So that's what's coming before you tonight. You can see in your staff report near the bottom, you see section 14.13. What it's about is regarding parking, storage, or use of campers and recreation vehicles and equipment. Right now, the way the language reads, it prohibits the uses of campers and RVs and similar equipment for living, sleeping, or housekeeping purposes when parked or stored on a residential lot. But we've had some instances where people have been staying in campers in areas that are not zoned residential, in commercial and even industrial areas. So the way the language reads right now, it says, residential only. We would like to change that to be, so it will apply citywide. Also, you'll see highlighted, it's suggested that we have an amendment to include the addition of park model recreational vehicles, which is kind of a tiny house that is built to recreational vehicle or camper industry standards. They're not built to our building code. And that's one item that our city council, through other conversations, they've been interested in making sure that any type of residential dwelling is built to building codes, not to the camper or RV standards. I believe that's an ANSI code, ANSII code. So that's the reason for these particular changes. And we can go through it, but according to the section below, you see in your staff report that we would like to add park model recreational vehicles. To clarify that, as far as camper recreational vehicle, it talks about where they can be stored on a temporary basis, but the key change in this is that no such equipment shall be used for living, sleeping, or housekeeping purposes when parked or stored on any property inside the city, not just on any residential lot. So that's the changes, kind of small changes in that section, but again, it's something that we want to get ahead of, and we do recommend approval of this. And when you do make a zoning amendment, it's handled very similar to that of a rezoning. It comes before the Planning Commission for a recommendation, then it goes to City Council for their final approval.
Any other questions for staff? I feel like this one's kind of...
Ari, I know I didn't see anything here. Does that also include like 18-wheelers or whatever?
This does not. We have another section in our guidelines. Actually, there's a standalone ordinance, Mr. Urban, regarding 18-wheelers where people may park them in front of their properties and things like that. Yeah, we have another guideline regarding that. Now, from a sleeping perspective, that's something we have not come across. But usually when we deal with the 18-wheelers, it's someone parking them in front of their house. Maybe they drive one for a living and they come in and maybe block the street or whatever the case may be. So we do have a separate older ordinance that applies to that.
Could I get a copy of that?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Okay. But on MISC 2201, it sounds like it's more on the living and building
Yeah, it applies
codes.
to people that living in campers, and also a step forward looking at the park model RVs and those not being built to building codes. They're
Okay.
built to a different specification.
Okay.
Maurice, is park model recreational vehicle defined somewhere else in the ordinance?
It is not addressed in the ordinance, and that's a good question. We may need to strengthen our definition section in the zoning ordinance to give a little bit more of an industry standard to what that may be. Good point.
I would.
When I looked it up, it looks like that's a brand name. Park model is a brand name.
Not from what I looked in my research. That's just what they, did you see several of those examples
Yeah.
in there? So what we looked up, and I don't know if that's maybe a regional name for it, but we saw several.
It's almost like a class of its own,
Yeah.
almost like an RV, like you have a Class A, Class D. Park model seems to be kind of a new standard where it's almost like a cabin, but it's on wheels.
It's very similar
So
to a
this
cabin.
only applies if they're on wheels, so if
Right.
they're installed.
And also, most of them are under 400 square feet. That's another stat. I think if they're, in order for them to meet building codes, they have to be over 400 square feet as well. So there's several little caveats to it.
So this, I'm thinking back to that project that we approved over by the DMV. That says, this doesn't apply to that, does it?
Yes, it does. As a matter of fact, after it went before the Planning Commission, it went before City Council. A lot of questions were raised regarding the type of construction to be used. The City Council stalled. They have not voted on it yet, but one of their concerns was, can you build these cabins or these structures to building code? And that's currently being investigated. There's been some concern about allowing more, again, they say it's not permanent, but allowing housing that's not built to building code standards. So that's where one of the holdups is right now. That's one reason why we're discussing it tonight in that regard.
Have you been to the Dream Center? Has anyone visited the Dream Center?
Dream?
Dream
It's called
Center?
the Dream Center in Easley.
Okay.
No, it's a group of women converted an old school to a facility that aids people in need. And one thing they did was installed a little village of tiny homes, and they let women with their children that are homeless live in the tiny homes. They sleep there and they have a bathroom but no kitchen. So I'm just wondering, would this preclude that then? Something like if someone wanted to do something in this community,
Yes,
so that they wouldn't be able to do that?
correct.
Yeah.
Well, each individual, if they make them that small, each individual required so much living space in it. So if you're
Yeah.
talking about 400 square feet, that's not gonna be,
The most, one of the most recent questions, and there's been some back and forth, again, that project's not dead yet, and has been about, well, what can you do with the industry standard you have now, and basically the type of construction, what can you do to make it meet building codes? And that's currently being explored right now. It may not be a significant change. That's something we're currently exploring, though.
Didn't they do a project like that where it met building codes? It was a small home somewhere in the old mill village. I want to say the lot project might have been a part of it.
That was built to building code standards. It was called they were calling it a tiny house when they built it for the lot project. I think maybe Leadership Anderson was involved in it. Since it meets building codes, it's really not a tiny home, it's a small house, is what it ended up being, because it did meet our building codes.
So, I mean, in actuality, this would make it so that they could do something similar to that. It would not be considered a recreational vehicle, it would not be
Right, it
mobile.
would, yeah, again, there's just different codes, different standards to what they can be constructed by. So the one in the Alphabet Streets that you're talking about was built to our building codes. These that we're applying right here, and what we talked about with that, it was called Rocky River Retreat is what the name of the proposed development is. They're not built to building code standards.
Okay.
so do they put these on a foundation or whatever?
That's one thing we're talking about. What can you do to make it more permanent like that? And I think initially the answer is no.
So basically, right now, if we were to approve this as is, you would not be able to do anything like that, even if you were to underpin it, if you were to take the wheels off, anything like that, correct?
If it was, you could make it meet our building code, that's possible. Again, would that be enough? That's a question I can't answer, but there would probably be several other things you would have to do to make them comply.
Any other questions for staff? And another thing is, right now it just says on a residential lot, and what you're wanting to change is also just any property.
On any property inside the city, right, and that's twofold. One is back to what we were just talking about with that proposed development, and also for the sheer fact that we, from time to time, will find someone living in a camper beside someone's house or behind a business, and they're not hooked up to utilities, or they may be illegally hooked up, or things of that nature. So that's another reason why we're looking at making these revisions.
What's the minimum square footage right now for a, kind of what we were talking about with that tiny house?
Well, in order to
or-
qualify as a tiny house under these guidelines and those standards, it's under 400 square feet.
Okay. And what do we, as the city, allow right now?
Well, right now, we don't allow it, because we don't allow campers for residential purposes. We have one section in our guidelines regarding manufactured housing, but that's more of what you think about with mobile homes. And they're built to another standard. They're built to some HUD manufactured standards, and that's outlined in our guidelines. These are not built to those standards either. These go back to the recreational vehicle camper codes. So we don't address these at all.
That's what I was about to ask. I mean, is there a way that we can add something to the zoning where we can have a special area? Or,
And that's.
I don't want to say an RV park or anything like that.
Yeah,
but-
right now,
but-
there's no place
In the city.
Would a campground qualify for something like this? Perhaps. We don't have any sections in our zoning ordinance that allow for RV parks or campgrounds. So that's what you're kind of asking right there.
Somewhat, other than, you know, I think the thought process of, you know, what was brought before us from the Rocky River was, it was going to be their product, and they were going to rent it out, or it was.
Yeah. And also, there's something I talked to the city attorney about, he's studying as well, you know, with the PDD, Planned Development District zoning classification, which is what they're proposing, would that supersede the basic language and the guidelines, you know, regarding this? So it's possible that we may find that through a PDD classification, you could do something like this. You know, what this could do too, you know, with you put it in the guidelines right now, say for instance, you have an infill lot inside the city limits, this would prohibit someone from putting a PMRV, you know, park model recreational vehicle, you know, on a lot between two houses also.
Who's gonna enforce this?
That would be the staff. You know,
Staff.
Yes, sir. We would enforce it through planning department. Also, the building department would have a large influence because of the building code aspect to it.
Any other thoughts, comments?
Did you say the Dream Center? What is it?
It's called the Dream Center, yeah.
Hearing none.
I guess I feel like there are times when Anderson isn't very amenable to people in need. And I happened to be at the county council meeting where they refused to allow the St. Clair house to be located in the county. And it was embarrassing. The questions that the citizens were asking and the things that the commissioners were saying was embarrassing. Now it's in Greenville and the community's embracing it. The state is raising money to give to this house, and you know we didn't want it here, and it's embarrassing. So I'm just thinking about things like that. Like, would this preclude an endeavor like that in our
Good
community
point. Good point.
forever?
Yeah, I mean, I can see both sides where, you know, you don't want to have blights in the city and things like that, but you also don't want to have, you know, tell someone they can't do commerce in the city or have, you know, something.
It has to be done well and thoughtfully, but I hate to see things like that precluded completely from now on.
Yeah.
So Maurice, what, if we can either approve, deny, or we can,
You can table it for further information. You know, we can
Okay.
provide, you know, I've got taken down some points you've made and some
Yeah.
questions you
Can
have.
we modify what you have?
that's what I was wondering as
In
well.
Absolutely.
In a motion?
Yes,
Okay.
you can modify that. That would be a recommendation to the city council, and then they will ultimately vote it,
Decide
you
whether.
know, up or down based on your modification. Yes,
I mean,
sir.
I was really wondering
Absolutely.
about modifying and taking the PMRV out of it and just doing that in that
Yeah,
way.
yeah. Just me, I'm concerned because I don't know what a PMRV is, and it's not been defined, and nobody tells me what it is. I'm perfectly fine and understand that it not being on any property in the city, that makes perfect sense. But
So how about this, until we can have a better definition, we can make a motion that we approve the amendment just with the language of any property in the city limits without the PMRV.
Basically taking out including park model recreational vehicle.
Yes, because it already reads no campers, RVs, or recreational equipment.
Of course,
That's not
Yeah,
defined, I
again,
mean, the
that-
PMRV will be defined in that.
Right, it
But
would-
until we really know and decide, is that a class?
Yeah, because, yeah, it is, since it's built to the recreational vehicle or camper standards, it would
Fall
essentially
under
be
that
considered a
anyway.
recreational vehicle.
Yeah.
But yes, any modification is definitely something you can do as a commission.
We have a place where we can make a motion.
Yeah.
I'd like to make a motion that we approve this as modified to include the language, any property in the city, but exclude the parentheses of including park model recreational vehicles.
All right. So the motion has been made to add the language of any property in the city instead of a residential lot, and exclude the parentheses, including park model recreational vehicles. Do I hear a second?
Second.
Mr. Seeger seconds. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any nays? All right, so that will go before City Council on April 11th with the
Possibly so,
amended.
sometime either April 11th or the 25th, most
Okay.
likely.
All right,
And we will definitely pass along the dialogue you had tonight.
Yes.
I think it's very important.
yes. All right, so now we move out of the public hearings into other business for the SD 2201.
Yes, in the overhead, it's kind of tough to see a lot of contour lines, but you see the gist of it also in your package, where you have a large drawings as well. It's probably one of the first couple of pages which you'll see this particular one, and which should give you most of the information regarding this request. But this is for a preliminary subdivision plat approval, and this is a part of a 203-acre piece of land that was annexed by the city council back in November. In September, this came before you, and you recommended approval of this request to annex the property. It's zoned PDD, Plan Development District. This pertains to the first phase of that development, which again is 203 acres. This is 47.33 acres of that 203 acres. But the PDD zoning classification, as you know, is a specific document to this particular piece of property which lays out the development guidelines and standards. And again, that is a document that you were able to scrutinize and review and moved it forward to the city council several months ago. In the document, a maximum of 325 single-family units or 600 townhouse units are allowed on the entire 203-acre piece of land. And if there is to be a combination of the types of units in the overall development, there would be a maximum of 150 single-family units and 275 townhouse units. As you can see in this, the first phase, they are proposing 265 townhouse units. So if they continue with the townhouse development trend throughout, even in the second phase, they could have a maximum of 600. If they plan to mix in with the second phase single-family residential development, they could have 150 houses and add basically 10 more townhouse units. But again, that second phase has not been determined yet by the applicant. And again, this is for 265 townhouse units. And then this is East River Street. It comes off of East River. And the layout is very similar to what you saw when it was, the conceptual plan showed more of a single-family layout, but the street layout is very similar to what it looked like before. Again, with the preliminary plat approval, this comes to you tonight just to make sure there's several things addressed on the plat, basic things like the map drawn to scale, name and location of subdivision, date, north arrow, scale, information about adjacent parcels of land, the boundary lines of the subdivision, the street layout, the lot layouts, contour lines, as you can see on there, location of streets, availability of utilities, and building setback lines and all of that. And the applicant, they provided this information on several pages in the packet that you have. We do recommend approval of this request. Looking through it on the surface from a preliminary plat standpoint, they do meet all of the requirements for a preliminary plat. And if you do approve this tonight, it will give them authorization to proceed under the supervision of the city engineer with construction drawings and submitting those. And those are the drawings that will go through all of our departments, particularly engineering, to make sure everything is complete. that will allow them to install improvements, stake lots. And although the design essentially avoids areas that may have potential flooding issues, this is also the time when it is submitted, it will go before our engineering department to make sure that anything related to flooding has been addressed. Also, we looked it over. It does meet the guidelines per the layout from the PDD document. We'll continue to monitor that as we go through the development process to make sure that all of the specifics outlined in the PDD document will be met. Had everything to deal with landscaping, open space, things of that nature. The applicants are here if you have any questions for them, but again, the staff recommends approval of this.
Okay. So question for staff. So it was an either 325 single family or 600, or a combination of 150, 275, is that correct?
Right.
And so we're doing 265
Yeah,
townhomes?
265 right now, so that's the first phase. And again, the way it reads, if they decide to do townhouses on the second phase, they could add
Yeah.
335-ish
Yes.
townhouses. If they choose to go with single-family houses, then they would really have the ability to add 10 more townhouses along with their up to 150 houses.
Okay.
When we were in the discussion phases with them, we wanted to make sure we capped that out with, because there was a mixture. That's why we have that
Okay.
number in there.
All right.
On that first page, the blue and the green, what are those two parcels that are in white?
In the middle?
Yeah, that is an interesting piece of property that is not owned by the developer. It is a piece of property that's landlocked. It actually goes to the apartment complex next door, I believe. So how they acquired that has still been a mystery. Did you ever determine what happened?
We have a pretty good idea.
Okay.
Do you share that?
Yeah, if you don't mind, that'd be good, yeah.
Yes, please.
Yeah, it's something that I've never seen anything like.
Hello, I'm Jordan Hammond. I'm with Liberty Communities. We're the applicant here. The explanation I got from our attorney, we actually had to do a title search on this piece of property that we're not under contract to purchase. What came back, the title search indicated that essentially this landlocked portion was intended to be a temporary sewer lagoon until the sewer main ran through that creek there. It was never used. It appears that the timing worked out to where the sewer lagoon was never used by the apartment complex, and they were able to tie in their improvements directly into the sewer main that's in that river or creek down there. I'm not sure if I think it's a city sewer line, is that right? Okay, yeah, so there's probably some historical stuff in the sewer department, but that's what our title search told us was the intended use for that property.
And that area is wet, so it's not like when the second phase comes in, there will be development all around that. It'll be set back pretty far from where that area is located.
Okay, what's that small building on River Street? The one at the top?
That, right there, that's nothing, there's just a vacant piece of land, it's not yours.
Pull that up and see.
Yeah. I can't remember.
Is that a single-family residence?
I'm checking to see if it's anything right now. Or is that just a?
You're talking about that landlocked parcel?
Yeah, but
It's a little,
It's pretty much in the flood zone.
We're talking about this one.
no, that one right there.
Over there.
Forty's the street, right?
There may be an error on our map,
I think so.
because everything else depicts, yeah, that's just,
Yeah, because
that's
it's
just an error on
not,
that should be
it's not
shaded here,
here.
Mr. Seegers.
All right. Any other questions for staff or for the applicant? Hearing none, would someone like to make a motion on SD 2202?
So moved.
Moved for approval. Have a second. Kari seconds. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right. So that, they can move along with getting that going with the city engineers. And as we have no addenda to the agenda, we will consider ourselves adjourned. Thank you.
Maybe it was the one on Williamson Road, remember it had that big
Yeah.